In an 18-month stretch from February 2003 to August 2004, 3 young women were preyed upon by a malicious monster out to inflict as much harm as possible. Each of these women had been out in public minding their own business when a man decided he would try to take their lives in a horrific manner, from trauma to the head to using his vehicle as his weapon of choice. Towards the end of 2004, the man was captured and taken into custody. He was found guilty of the charges a few years later, but in a shocking twist, he was linked to another unsolved slaying that had happened 8 years earlier. Amanda Jane Dowler, or Millie as she was known, was born on June 25, 1988, to parents Bob and Sally Dowler. Millie had an older sister, Gemma, who she adored. The girls got on extremely well and were practically best friends. Gemma described her sister as friendly and vivacious with a sparkle in her eye. She had many close friends and was a kind, generous young girl who loved to cheer others up when they were having a bad day. Millie was a bright light in the lives of those around her, making her sudden disappearance all the harder to bear. It was March 21, 2002. 13-year-old Millie left Heathside School at 3:07 p.m. and walked to the Weybridge railway station with a friend. Both girls got on a train and rode to the Walton-on-Thames station. This was one stop before where Millie usually got off, at Hersham. The girls had decided to grab a bite to eat at the station cafe. Millie made a call to her father at 3:47 p.m., telling him she would be home in the next 30 minutes. The girls parted ways at 4:05 p.m., and Millie set off home. The last time she was seen was waiting at a bus stop on Station Avenue, where a friend of Gemma recognized her. CCTV cameras further along the route showed no sign of Millie. Millie didn't arrive home as planned, and worry started to set in. By 7 p.m., her parents called the police and reported her as missing. A large-scale search operation followed by numerous different officers on foot looking for Millie. Police helicopters were also deployed, hoping to catch a glimpse of the young girl or find something that showed signs of her being in a particular area. Local rivers were searched, and the route Millie should have taken was gone over with a fine-tooth comb. When the CCTV cameras along Station Avenue were accessed, a red Daiwa Nexia was pictured at 4:32 p.m. 7 years later. We would find out who was behind the wheel. Detectives working on the case made multiple public appeals for any witnesses who may have seen anything suspicious or seen Millie herself that day. Her disappearance was so sudden that initial theories revolved around Millie either purposely running away or knowing the person who took her. How could a complete stranger have grabbed her at this time of day in a fairly public setting? It didn't make any sense. Millie's family was adamant that she wouldn't have run away. Crime Watch UK aired a reconstruction of Millie's last known movements and featured a direct appeal to the young girl, as Millie having run away was the definite best-case scenario. But her mother couldn't fathom why her youngest daughter would do such a thing. Years later, it was publicly revealed that Millie had written letters saying she was going to leave home and expressing some unhappiness. In reality, these letters were nothing more than a teenage girl writing her completely normal frustrations out on paper after what was likely a typical argument with her parents or sister. Nothing more. On March 28th, the police still didn't believe they were dealing with a stranger taking Millie by force. No witnesses had come forward having witnessed any sort of struggle, despite Millie having been seen on multiple occasions throughout the afternoon. They felt it was unlikely she had gone anywhere with a stranger, hence believing she was familiar with the person she left with. For weeks went by with few leads and still no sign of Millie. On April 23, 2002, a body was found in the River Thames, and immediately speculation ran wild that this could be Millie Dowler. It was later confirmed that the remains were that of 73-year-old Macy Thomas. She had disappeared the year prior and her passing was ruled as non-suspicious. Macy likely drowned. Weeks turned into months with still no new information about what had happened to Millie. Frustrations continued to grow for the Dowlers, not understanding how their daughter could just disappear into thin air. As if things couldn't get any worse, the family themselves started facing scrutiny, with Bob Dowler being the main target. Since the police had stated on many occasions that Millie likely knew whoever she had left with, naturally the media latched on to that person being a family member. While trying to come to terms with their loss, they also had to contend with stories being published and unfounded rumors spreading. Bob Dowler had nothing to do with his daughter's disappearance, which made the focus on him hard to bear. Not only was it a horrific thing to be accused of, but Bob knew that all the time spent looking at him was time wasted on finding the person who was really responsible. Authorities later apologized for the possibility of missing crucial leads while looking at Bob for Millie's disappearance. By June, the authorities spoke to the Dowlers and told them they needed to brace themselves for the worst-case scenario. Bob and Sally continued to send their daughter text messages, hoping she was still out there somewhere. That month, a £100,000 reward was offered by the Sun. But still, no one came forward with any useful information. In September 2002, everyone's worst fears were realized. It was September 18th, and a small group of mushroom pickers were out in Yateley Heath Woods in Yateley, Hampshire, when one of them spotted something in the undergrowth. It was a body. The authorities were immediately identified, and dental records confirmed that they had found Millie Deller. She was found unclothed, with none of the items she had in her possession when she disappeared. That included her backpack, purse, and cell phone. To this day, none of the items have ever been recovered. The case was no longer a missing person investigation. Authorities were now looking for the person responsible for taking Millie's life. The Surrey police launched the investigation, titled Operation Ruby, to bring this monster to justice. A month after Millie was found, the Surrey police set up a large-scale roadblock near Yateley Heath Woods. Roughly 6,000 motorists were stopped and questioned, but this produced no new leads. Items from Millie's bedroom were taken in for forensic testing, and on March 23, 2003, a year after she was last seen alive, unknown male DNA was found on one of her items of clothing. This led authorities to theorize that Millie had potentially met with the man who took her life before she vanished. Unfortunately, this lead was shortly ruled out. Despite hundreds of people being interviewed, extensive house-to-house inquiries, and a thorough look into some unsavory characters that lived near where Millie was last seen and near where her body had been found, the Surrey police still had nothing. The next possible lead came when the Dowlers received a chilling letter from someone claiming to be responsible for what happened to Millie. It didn't take long to work out the letter was written by Paul Hughes, who was in jail at the time for indecent acts to a young girl. He was given an additional 5 years behind bars for the letter and the threats he made to Millie's sister, Gemma. The prison service made an apology to the Dowlers for not having intercepted the letter before it was sent to them. Other sick individuals also viewed Millie's disappearance and passing as some sort of game. Leanne Newman made multiple phone calls claiming to be Millie before her blog was found. She called Bob and Sally, the police, and even Millie's school. Newman was given a 5-month prison sentence after pleading guilty to making these phone calls. Gary Farr, a mentally ill man, repeatedly emailed those close to Millie and the investigators, claiming she had been smuggled into Poland, claimed her body was nothing more than a cover-up. He was eventually sanctioned under the Mental Health Act for indefinite holding due to being a danger to the public. Behind all of this nonsense, there was still a family desperate to know what happened to their Millie, but the truth was years away. On February 4, 2003, 19-year-old Marcia McDonald was hit over the head with a blunt object, not far from her Hampton home. The incident happened not long after Marcia had gotten off the 111 bus at the Percy Road bus stop. Tragically, Marcia lost her life 2 days later in hospital. On May 28th of the following year, 18-year-old Kate Sheedy was walking home when she noticed a suspicious car parked on the roadside. A man was inside, and the engine was running, but the lights were deliberately turned off. Kate decided to move away from the vehicle and cross the road. Before she even knew what happened, Kate was run over by the car. Proving this wasn't an accident, the man then reversed over Kate's body before racing off. Miraculously, Kate was able to drag herself off the road and find help. Despite the severity of her condition, Kate survived after a lengthy hospital stay. 3 months later, another young woman was preyed upon. Amélie Delagange was a 20-year-old French student visiting England. Shockingly, Amélie's life was taken in a brutal manner similar to that of Marcia McDonald. It took authorities less than 24 hours to link the cases. On November 22, 2004, a man was arrested for what had happened to Amélie de la Grange. His name was Levi Belfield. Levi Rabbits was born on May 17, 1968, in Isleworth, London, to parents Jean and Joseph Rabbits. It is unclear exactly when he changed his surname to Belfield from Rabbits, but we do know that was his mother's maiden name. When he was still a child, Belfield's father passed away after battling with leukemia. He grew up with his 4 siblings on a council estate in southwest London and attended Crane Junior High School. When Belfield was in his early teens, he was convicted of breaking into a house and stealing various items. That was in 1981. In 1990, Belfield got into a physical altercation with a police officer, which resulted in a second charge. His criminal history is littered with multiple offenses and convictions, but none of them were as serious as what he would later be accused of. Belfield has 11 children with 5 women. His ex-girlfriends later described Belfield's behavior as charming initially before his true colors started to show. All of the women shared the same stories of what Belfield was like as a partner. This is what Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton, who worked on the later cases involving Belfield, had to say of the man. When we started dealing with him, he came across as very jokey, like he's your best mate. But he's a cunning individual, violent. He can switch from being nice to being nasty instantly. In 2003 and 2004, Levi Belfield operated a wheel clamping business. This gave him an intimate knowledge of the streets he stalked. Like a wild animal looking for its next meal, Levi would prowl the streets looking for a suitable victim. Detective Sutton commented on this mentality of Belfield, saying, "Belfield has a massive ego to feed. He thinks he's God's gift to everyone. He drives around in his car, feels a bit whatever, and sees some young blonde girl. The young blonde girl says, 'Go away,' and he thinks, 'You dare to turn down Levi Belfield. You're worth nothing.' And then she gets a whack over the head. It is shown in the case of Kate Sheedy. She was smart enough to think she didn't like the look of his car and crossed the road. He thinks, 'You think you're so clever,' and whoosh, he runs her over. After CCTV linked him to Amelie's case, Belfield was surveilled by undercover officers who witnessed him talking to young girls at bus stops. It was quite clear that had he not been taken into custody, more women would have lost their lives. On February 25, 2008, Levi Belfield was found guilty of taking Marcia McDonald's and Amelie Delagrange's lives. He was also convicted of his actions towards Kate Sheedy. On February 26th, Belfield found he would be spending the rest of his life behind bars. His defense passed the news on to Belfield as he refused to be in court that day. Levi Belfield was also considered in 2 other cases, falsely imprisoning 17-year-old Anna Maria Rennie back in October 2001 and attempting to take the life of Irma Dragoshi in December 2003. Both women identified Belfield as the person responsible, but juries failed to reach a unanimous verdict in both cases. Following his convictions, 39-year-old Belfield was publicly named as a chief suspect in Millie's case. This was mainly due to CCTV footage that tied him to the Red Daewoo Nexia scene around the time Millie was last seen on the same road that she had been on. Further investigation showed that Belfield's then-girlfriend owned the car, and she lived in the same area as the Dowlers. In an interview Belfield did with the Daily Mirror in 2009, he said, "There's not many Red Daewoos floating about in Walton-on-Thames, so we've got to be realistic about it. But then I've got to be careful about how I answer these questions. I did use the Daewoo once, and I was stopped by the police once in it for speeding. It is unclear why Belfield thought this was the right thing to say when being considered for something so heinous. Like Millie's items, the car was never found. In March 2010, investigators felt certain they had their man, and Levi Belfield was charged with snatching Millie from the road and taking her life. Belfield's trial began on May 10, 2011 in the Central Criminal Court, presided over by Mr. Justice Wilkie. It took place over 6 weeks before a verdict was reached. In his opening statement, the prosecuting barrister recounted what happened to Millie on her final day. On this day, an entirely innocent and quite ordinary diversion to a station cafe to buy some chips with some school friends was a decision that was to cost Millie her life, because it meant her taking a fateful journey along Station Avenue. Belfield was found guilty on June 23, 2011, and given a second life sentence. Years later, Belfield admitted to what he had done to Millie. The Dowlers finally had some sort of closure, but still a sour taste was left in the mouths by many aspects of the investigation. Sally spoke to journalists and explained, "Our family life has been scrutinized and laid open for everyone to inspect." Bob said that the price for this conviction had been far too costly for the family. Belfield's defense had viciously cross-examined Millie's parents as Gemma watched on. She later described what she witnessed as one of the worst days in her life. The defense attempted to paint Millie as a depressed teen, not the vivacious girl those around her knew. Millie's story was subsequently brought back into the spotlight on June 30th, 2011, when Crime Watch aired a special title taken, The Millie Dowler Story. The program detailed the investigation, had witness interviews, and had Millie's family involved. Reconstruction was also featured, where they reenacted how that day unfolded. Millie's family was finally able to show the nation who Millie was as a person beyond the sensationalized headlines. After everything, one question still remained. Was Belfield responsible for more slayings? Patricia Joyce Morris was born on January 10, 1966, to parents George, a retired Army chief, and Marjorie Morris. She was one of 3 siblings, with a sister and 2 brothers. Patsy, as she was fondly known, was born in Birmingham, but moved to Isleworth, southwest London when she was 13 years old. On June 16, 1966, in 1980, Patsy disappeared during a lunch break at school. It has been theorized that the 14-year-old decided to walk home that day as she needed to change into dry clothes after she had been without a raincoat that morning. On her way there, Patsy vanished. 2 days later, a police dog found her body on Hounslow Heath. She had been left face down in a thicket just a quarter-mile from her home. A ligature had been used to take her life. Levi Belfield was 12 years old at the time. After leaving Crane Junior School, he moved to Feltham Comprehensive, the same school that Patsy attended. In fact, Belfield had been her childhood boyfriend. A year after what happened to Patsy, Belfield was convicted of the first official crime of burglary. He wasn't at school on the day Patsy was last seen, and he knew the area where she was found very well. When Patsy's mother learned of where her daughter was discovered, it caused great confusion. She didn't understand why Patsy would have walked through there. "We can't understand what she was doing on the heath. She was always told not to go there and never disobeyed our orders," she told the press. Knowing now that Belfield used to hang out there, often skipping school to do so, it does make you wonder. But was Belfield born evil? Could a boy that age really be capable of committing something like that? Following the conclusion of Millie's case, the possibility was explored. When Patsy's father, George Morris, heard about Belfield's connection to his daughter, he recalled a time all those years ago when a teenage boy had called his house and given him a death threat. He believes that was Belfield. He's a local man, which is why it could be him. And it's terrifying to think that someone of 12 or 13 could have done it, George said. Patsy Morris wasn't the only unsolved slaying that Belfield was considered for. In 1990, 51-year-old housewife Judith Gold was found a stone's throw from her Hampstead home, having been viciously struck in the head with an unknown item. Similar incidents took place across London from 1990 to 2004. All of these cases could be linked to Belfield due to the nature of them. The weapons of choice were distinct, the same type of weapons he used on Marcia and Amelie. While they couldn't confirm without a shadow of a doubt that he was the person responsible, he could also not be ruled out in any of the many incidents except for one. On July 6, 1996, 45-year-old Lynn Russell and her young daughter Megan, the pair and Lynn's other daughter, 9-year-old Josie, were ambushed while walking home from a swimming gala. They were then tied up and struck repeatedly with a hammer. Lynn, Megan, and the family dog lost their lives that day. Miraculously, Josie survived. While she was able to make a full recovery, it is highly likely that she still lives with the mental scars of what happened that tragic day. Belfield allegedly confessed to the crime to his cellmate. Belfield denies ever making this confession. His ex-girlfriend, who helped get a conviction in Millie's trial, has always maintained that Belfield was with her that day. "My daughter was born in '96, and that was the day of my birthday. He, Belfield, never left my side all day and all night. So there's absolutely no way he could have gone from Twickenham, where I lived, or Windsor, where I kept my horses, to Kent. Do what they say he did and get back without me knowing he was there. I can hand to my heart, I hate to say it, but I can say hand to my heart, he didn't do it, she said. Michael Stone was convicted of the charges after a second trial, following a successful appeal from his first conviction. Michael Stone had been behind bars since 2001. He still maintains his innocence. There have been many other cases that Belfield was considered for, and some that he allegedly confessed to, but as of today, police have not been able to find any substantial evidence that ties Belfield to any of these cases. Maybe one day the police will track down who was responsible for taking these lives, and maybe that man may just be Levi Belfield. Levi Belfield remains behind bars at HMP Franklin in County Durham. He will never set foot in the outside world again. On June 29, 2017, Gemma released a book titled My Sister Millie. In the heartfelt piece, Gemma describes what it was like living through that wild time, dealing with the loss of her sister, the media circus, and the suspicions of her parents. Gemma explains how she found healing. As an excerpt from the blurb reads, it is the story of two stolen childhoods, Millie's and Gamma's, and about the love that kept the family together as they struggled with terrible darkness and injustice. Heidi Marie Erickson was born on December 14, 1984, in St. Paul, Minnesota. She was the daughter of John and Linda Erickson and had two brothers, Peter and Joel. Heidi committed her life to Jesus Christ as a young girl and faithfully walked with him. She was described as a joyful child of God. She loved and was loved by her family and many wonderful friends. In 2005, Heidi met Nick Furcus at church, hit it off, and they got married soon after. Nick was born February 25, 1983, and is the son of Steve and Julie Furcus. Heidi found work at Securian, a financial services company, while Nick Furcus was the director of operations for a carpet cleaning business. Heidi and Nick Furcus were both close with their parents. In 2010, the couple had been dealing with financial difficulties and were about to be evicted from their home. They were in over $15,000 of credit card debt. Heidi knew none of this, however. Out of shame, Nick did not tell anyone about their financial situation. Early in the morning on April 25, 2010, at approximately 6:30, 25-year-old Heidi made a 911 call from her cell phone. She frantically said that someone's trying to break into their home. She could be heard breathing heavily and screaming. It was clear she was terrified. The call ended abruptly with a loud noise. Just 65 seconds later, another 911 call was made from their home, this time from her husband, 27-year-old Nick Furcus. "My wife is shot. Someone broke into our house," Nick screamed into the phone. "I've been shot." When officers arrived at the scene, they found Nick with a gunshot wound to his left thigh. He was beside Heidi on the floor, talking to the 911 operator. He was highly emotional and was taken to the hospital. Heidi had been fatally shot in the upper back. Her body was found in the kitchen. Investigators noticed that the Furcus house was clean and tidy, and the entryway table beside the front door was undisturbed. They could not find any signs of a struggle taking place or anyone that forced themselves into the house. Nick Furcus told Sergeant Jim Gray of the St. Paul Police Department that he awoke to a suspicious noise at his front door, grabbed his shotgun from the closet where he kept it for safety, and alerted his sleeping wife. Both of them were trying to run out the back door to the detached garage to escape. According to Nick, Heidi stopped next to the front door to grab her wallet, which was on the table next to the front door. The door opened and there was a guy around 6 feet, 1 inch or 6 feet 2 inches with a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood drawn tight around his face. Nick Furcus said that the guy grabbed the barrel of the shotgun, they wrestled, and that his fingers slipped onto the trigger and it went off. The gunshot hit Heidi and she fell onto the floor. Nick Furcus and the intruder struggled over the shotgun and the gun went off a second time, hitting Nick in the leg. He fell down and the intruder took off through the front door. He told police that they were about to lose their house because they were behind on their bills. He said that they had not told any of their friends or family about the foreclosure or their need to be out of their house, but that they were going to tell their parents and friends and were planning to move later that day. According to him, they had planned to pack up their house on Sunday and Monday morning, put some of their belongings in the garage to get later, and find someone to stay with. Photographs and a video taken inside the Firkus home after the incident showed that despite having to be out of the house the next day, absolutely no packing had been done. Also, Heidi was scheduled to work on Monday, April 26th. She did not request the day off. On Thursday, April 22, 2010, 3 days before her life was ended, Heidi exchanged text messages with a friend, making plans to get a pedicure in the afternoon on Sunday, April 25th. In this exchange, Heidi was given the option of doing the pedicure on Sunday or the following Wednesday, and Heidi chose Sunday. She also suggested that they all go to church together that Sunday morning. It was evident that Heidi knew nothing about the eviction or that they had to move to a new place. Heidi's funeral took place at the Calvary Church in Roseville, Minnesota, a week after she lost her life. Many messages sympathizing with her parents, Nick, and their families streamed in. She was remembered as a beautiful young woman, and the community was deeply saddened. On her tombstone, the words, "Joyful Child of God," are engraved. Extensive neighborhood canvassing and a canine search showed no sign of an intruder. He was never found. Investigators did note that Nick Firkus perpetuated several false accounts to them during interviews. He became a suspect in the case when the police found no signs of a forced break-in or any missing items. There were also no background noises that indicated there was an intruder or a struggle taking place. When investigators looked into the audio of the 2-911 calls made, investigators also found only Nick Firkus's DNA on the gun, and several witnesses testified there were no signs of a break-in. Nick Firkus's attorneys claimed the intruder was wearing gloves and was in the home for only a couple of seconds, so he could not have left DNA evidence. Nick Firkus retained the services of a defense attorney, Joe Friedberg, who recommended he cease contact with the St. Paul Police Department. At the advice of his lawyer, Nick Firkus declined investigators' request to sit down with a police sketch artist to create a composite of the alleged intruder. I knew they had used that as a lever to try interrogating him more. So I said, "No, we won't do that, but we'll hire an artist and do it," Friedberg told ABC News. Nick Firkus and Joe Friedberg returned to the St. Paul's Police Department with their own sketch of the alleged intruder, who Nick Firkus said was a male in his late 30s and wearing a hoodie. The police released the sketch through the media to see if any tips would come in. A woman identified Michael Pye to police as a potential match. Investigators started researching him immediately, and they learned that he was engaged in a pattern of breaking into homes in St. Paul around 6 in the morning. However, Michael Pye was incarcerated on the day of Heidi's slaying. Authorities subsequently cleared him of having any involvement in this case. A few months after Heidi's demise, Nick Firkus met Rachel Watson. She believed he was the man of her dreams. Rachel is described as a loving, caring, and generous individual who is always ready to extend a helping hand. She is also known for her kind and amicable behavior, which helps her maintain positive relationships with everyone around her. Also born in Minnesota, Rachel got to know Nick Firkus on a personal level through her sister Sarah and her brother-in-law David Olson, who were both close friends of Heidi. In fact, Sarah considered herself one of Heidi's best friends, and she was the one to insist that Nick Firkus was a wonderful man who loved and took care of his first wife without fail. Neither Sarah nor David minded when Rachel fell in love with him before deciding to tie the knot. The two got married in August 2012 and moved into a house purchased for them by Nick Firkus's parents. They welcomed their first child just a few months later. Neighbors who were acquainted with the couple claimed they appeared utterly in love, and they even went on to become proud parents of 2 more wonderful children. Yet with time, Rachel began doubting her husband's involvement in Heidi's case. Her suspicion about her husband's involvement with what happened to Heidi were raised when she found a notice that they might lose their home to foreclosure due to unpaid property taxes. Nick and Rachel Firkus had an arrangement where they would pay the mortgage amount to Nick Firkus's parents and he would pay the property taxes directly to the county. She immediately thought of what she had heard about Heidi's demise. According to Rachel, "I didn't know that this was happening and I'm living with this person. I have children with this person and the last time he had problems with finances. A lot of things went wrong," she said in an interview. She decided to confront him about it. Because she feared for her life as well, She sent their children away and even decided to record the whole conversation before talking to Nick. Although Nick Ferkus said nothing incriminating while talking to his spouse, it was apparent he was hiding something. In one recording, Rachel said, "The fact that you're lying was so easy for you to do in front of me over and over and over makes me think that I could end my wife's life." He responded. She replied, "Yes." This worry kept nagging Rachel until she could not take it anymore and divorced him in 2019. Rachel told ABC's 2020 that catching Nick Ferkus in a substantially similar lie was what led her to see the 2010 event in an entirely new light. In 2019, Sergeant Nicole Sipes of the St. Paul Police Department took a new look at Heidi Ferkus' case. "The case always bothered me because the circumstances did not seem to fit what happened," Sipes said. Once Sipes learned of Nick Ferkus' recent divorce from his second wife, she reached out to Rachel, who shared her suspicions. "She could have also been a victim," Sipes said. In May 2021, Nick Ferkus was arrested and for the first time officially charged with taking his first wife's life. The investigation showed Nick Ferkus was served with foreclosure in June 2009, and their house was sold at a sheriff's auction in the same month, 10 months before Heidi was slayed. Eviction proceedings had been filed in February, and an eviction hearing was held on March 8, 2010, which Nick Ferkus attended alone. The lockout date was originally set for April 9, 2010. Nick Ferkus called the attorneys and stated his grandmother was in hospice and asked to move it to April 26. However, investigators found no evidence either of his grandmothers were in hospice or passed away in 2010. In a review of correspondence between the couple and financial documents found in the home, investigators were unable to find any proof that Heidi knew of the impending eviction. Nick Ferkus's trial started in February 2022. Defense attorneys argued Heidi knew about the foreclosure and impending eviction. Prosecutors, on the other hand, said she did not know, and her husband was desperate. Nick Ferkus, the complaint said, had done absolutely no packing and kept Heidi completely in the dark about the fact that they were about to be evicted on April 26, 2010, which was one day after the slaying. Investigators have reviewed the text messages and emails sent to and from Heidi and Nick Ferkus' cell phones and email accounts. There is not a single message that references foreclosure or eviction proceedings, or gives any indication that they would need to move out of their house imminently. On the contrary, on March 11, 2010, Heidi sent an email to a friend saying, "Wish we weren't tied down to our house so we could move somewhere fun." The law firm handling the foreclosure and eviction has no documentation signed by Heidi, and their representatives never had any contact with Heidi. All their contacts were with Nick Ferkus. Investigators have spoken with Heidi's family, friends, and co-workers, and not one person said that Heidi ever said anything about foreclosure, eviction, or needing a place to stay or store their belongings. In April 2010, Heidi emailed Nick Ferkus multiple times regarding scheduling a meeting with a realtor who helped them buy their house and who was referred to as JS and also a friend from church. Nick Ferkus responded by saying that he had been in contact with JS. On April 23, 2010, Heidi sent Nick Ferkus an email, asking whether he had heard from JS. Nick Ferkus responded, "JS said that he's ready to meet when we are. I told him Monday should be good." Police interviewed JS, who said that he had not spoken to Nick Ferkus in over a year and that there was no meeting scheduled for any Monday. The FBI also combined their ballistics testing and a virtual model of Heidi and Nick Ferkus's house to prove that the shots were most likely not accidental in the middle of the struggle, but deliberate. However, Nick Ferkus's attorney countered that these findings did not necessarily disprove his version of the events. Finally, the prosecutor asked the big question. Did you have anything to do with the incident in which Heidi lost her life? No, Nick Ferkus said. Absolutely not. Ramsey County prosecutors argued that Nick Ferkus hid details of their financial troubles from his wife and took her life due to the shame of their impending eviction. It wasn't just going to be the loss of his house. It was going to be the realization that he had lied to his wife, and he had lied to his friends. He had lied to the community for many years. Ramsey County Assistant District Attorney Elizabeth Lohman said. He took Heidi's life and saved his reputation. Senior Assistant Hennepin County Attorney Rachel Cracker said at the trial, where she aided Ramsey County prosecutors in securing the conviction. The trial lasted 11 days. On February 10, 2023, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Nick Firkus guilty of slaying Heidi. Robert Richman, Nick Firkus's defense attorney, refuted these allegations, but nevertheless he was found guilty on all the charges against him. In April 2023, Firkus was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. It took more than a decade for this case to be solved, and it could very well have still been unsolved if Firkus was not caught in a big lie by his second wife, Rachel. Nick Firkus's family declined a request from ABC News for an interview, but issued a statement in support of him. He was wrongly convicted and sits in jail for a crime he did not commit. This is not just the belief of heartbroken parents. A part of the statement reads, "After 13 years, Heidi's family and friends found some sort of closure. They had this to say in a statement. Because of the lies we were told as early as the day after her life was ended, along with the pressures to believe them, it has been virtually impossible to find closure to our grief. As the shock begins after what happened to Heidi, the realization quickly set in that everything Nick Firkus was telling us betrayed who I knew my sister to be," Heidi's brother Peter Erickson said. The fact that he had the audacity to peddle a story that was so obviously inconsistent with Heidi's character was, and still is, very much insulting and offensive to me and everyone else who actually knew and loved her. "I really miss my sister," he added. Heidi's mom, Linda Erickson, holding back tears, said, "Nick Firkus's unthinkable actions robbed her daughter and loved ones of participating in that adventure of life with her. She looked forward to being a mother," she said of Heidi. At present, Rachel still resides in St. Paul, Minnesota, where she owns and operates her own cosmetics company, Be Lovely. On top of it, she is also a vocal advocate for victims of human trafficking. In fact, reports indicate that Be Lovely donates 10% of each sale to organizations that work for victims of trafficking and other social injustices. It honestly is great to witness Rachel's success. Nick Firkus is serving his life sentence without parole at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Sandy Point is a coastal town located in Victoria, Australia. It is situated on the southeastern coast of the country, near the entrance to the Gippsland Lakes. Sandy Point is known for its beautiful sandy beaches, making it a popular destination for beachgoers and water sports enthusiasts. The area also offers opportunities for fishing, bird watching, and other outdoor activities. On
The area
Christmas Day
also
in
offers
2017,
opportunities for
a
fishing,
snorkeler made a
bird
startling
watching, and
discovery
other
at Shallow
outdoor
Inlet
activities.
in Sandy Point. The snorkeler
On
found
Christmas
human
Day in
remains on the ocean floor.
2017,
The
a
remains were devoid
snorkeler
of
made a
tissue,
startling
clothing,
discovery at
or
Shallow
personal
Inlet
effects.
in
Remarkably,
Sandy Point.
almost the
The
entire skeleton
snorkeler
was
found
uncovered
human
in a
remains on the
near-perfect
ocean
condition beneath
floor.
the sand.
The
With no
remains were
context or
devoid
clues
of
to the man's
tissue,
identity,
clothing, or personal
Victoria
effects.
police reported the finding to the
Remarkably,
coroner,
almost
and
the
transferred
entire
the remains to
skeleton
the
was
Victorian
uncovered
Institute
in a
for
near-perfect
Forensic Medicine.
condition
As
beneath
the
the
team of
sand.
experts began their scientific
With
tests,
no
they
context
were
or
able to
clues
infer
to the
some
man's
characteristics
identity,
of the unknown
Victoria
person.
police
The forensic
reported the finding to the
determined
coroner
that the remains
and
belonged
transferred
to
the
a
remains
Caucasian
to the
male,
Victorian
aged
Institute
between
for
21
Forensic
and 37
Medicine.
years, who
As the
stood at
team of
approximately
experts began their
170
scientific
centimeters tall.
tests,
The
they were
forensic
able to
odontologist
infer
who delved
some
into the dental
characteristics of the
restorations
unknown
noticed that
person.
work done on the teeth hinted
The
at the
forensic
fact that the person
anthropologist
lost their life
determined
a
that
very
the
long time
remains
ago or
belonged
were
to a
not from
Caucasian
Australia.
male
The man's upper
aged
jaw was
between
recovered,
21
but
and
not the lower
37
jaw.
years, who
Radiocarbon
stood at
testing was not
approximately
able to illuminate the
170
timeline. It
centimeters
indicated
tall.
a 95%
The
probability
forensic
that the individual lived
odontologist
between
who delved into the
1666
dental
and
restorations
1942,
noticed that work
which is
done
hardly
on the
specific.
teeth
A nuclear
hinted at the
DNA
fact that
profile
the
and a
person lost their
mitochondrial
life
DNA
a
profile
very long
were
time
obtained
ago,
from the remains.
or were
The
not
DNA
from
profile
Australia.
information was
The
compared to
man's
the
upper
Victorian
jaw
missing
was
persons
recovered,
DNA database,
but not the lower jaw.
but no match was found.
Radiocarbon
The DNA
testing
profile
was
also
not
uploaded
able
to
to
the National
illuminate the
Criminal
timeline.
Investigation DNA
It
database
indicated
for
a
identification
95%
purposes,
probability
with no
that
match.
the individual
Since he
lived
could not be
between
identified, the man was named the
1666
Sandy
and
Point John Doe.
1942,
At one point,
which is
there was
hardly
speculation that
specific.
the remains could have been those of Martin Weiberg. Martin was a ship's carpenter aboard the SS Avoca, who in 1877 managed to steal 5,000 gold sovereigns that would be worth millions of dollars today. Martin was caught and arrested on October 29,
No match was
1878.
found.
He spent 6
The
weeks in
DNA
custody
profile
and went to
was
the
also
Tarwin River to
uploaded
show
to the
police where
National
the rest of the
Criminal
gold
Investigation
sovereigns were hidden.
DNA
During the
database for
search,
identification
Weiberg
purposes,
punched one of the
with
officers
no
in the
match.
stomach and ran
Since
into
he could
nearby
not be
bushes.
identified,
He
the
managed to
man was
evade police
named the
capture
Sandy
for 5 more
Point
months.
John Doe.
Weiberg met up with police again on a bush track near Eagle Point in Painesville, Australia. He was arrested, taken to Melbourne, and sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. Once released, Weiberg traveled to Hobart and purchased a yacht. He sailed the yacht back to Waratah Bay in Gippsland, parked the yacht, and rowed a small boat to shore to collect supplies. But when he tried to row back to the yacht, the weather turned bad. His small boat was found washed ashore the next day, and Weiberg is presumed to have drowned, but his body was never found. Of course, the only way of finding out if the remains belonged to Martin Weiberg would be modern DNA technology. The Victorian Institute for Forensic Medicine was determined to discover the identity of this unknown man. Recently, they embarked on a program to explore the use of forensic genetic genealogy to solve several Australian cold cases, including this cold case. Forensic evidence was sent to Othram's laboratory in the Woodlands. Texas and Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a comprehensive DNA profile. Once Othram developed the DNA profile, it was returned to investigators, who then uploaded the profile to genealogical databases. The investigative research resulted in a compelling lead that Sandy Point John Doe was Mr. Christopher Luke Moore, a Gippsland farmer and World War I veteran who was thought to have drowned in Waratah Bay in 1928. He enlisted for the war, aged 18, serving for more than 18 months for the 10th Field Artillery Brigade. Historic police and coronial documents reveal that Christopher was at Waratah Bay with his parents, Cornelius and Charlotte, brother Francis, wife Elizabeth, and toddler Mary, when he got into difficulty in the waves on December 30th, 1928. A beachgoer tried to save him, but the tide was
With
too
no
strong.
context or
Cornelius Moore
clues to the
spent
man's
10 long
identity,
days searching the
Victoria
coastline for his
Police
son
reported
without
the
success.
finding to the coroner
Unearthed historical
and transferred the
records unveiled
remains
an
to the
interesting
Victorian
twist.
Institute
Mere
for
weeks
Forensic
after
Medicine.
Christopher's potential drowning,
As the team
a
of
local Sandy
experts
Point
began
farmer
their
discovered a
scientific
mandible at
tests,
Shallow
they were
Inlet.
able to
Christopher's
infer
father,
some characteristics
recognizing
of the
distinct
unknown
dental
person.
work, confirmed the
The
mandible
forensic
as his son's.
anthropologist
The coronial
determined that
inquest
the
held on
remains
January
belonged to a
24th,
Caucasian male
1929,
aged
officially
between
validated
21
this
and
identification.
37 years,
Recently,
who
the
stood at
Victorian Institute
approximately
for Forensic Medicine's
170
findings were
centimeters
shared with
tall.
the state coroner. A
The
possible
forensic
grandniece of Christopher
odontologist
Luke
who
Moore was
delved into the
identified,
dental
residing in
restorations
Gippsland,
noticed that work
Australia.
done on the teeth
Police contacted his
hinted at
vital
the
link to
fact that the
history,
person
and
lost
she
their life a
graciously
very long
cooperated,
time ago,
confirming the family's
or
account
were not
of
from
Christopher's
Australia.
drowning and the subsequent
The man's
recovery and
upper
burial of
jaw
his
was
mandible.
recovered,
To
but
establish
not the
an
lower
irrefutable
jaw.
familial connection, the
Radiocarbon
grandniece provided a
testing was
DNA
not able to
sample.
illuminate
Through
the timeline.
confirmatory DNA analysis,
It indicated a
the truth was
95%
confirmed.
probability
Sandy
that
Point
the
John Doe
individual
was
lived
indeed Christopher
between
Luke Moore. The
1666
discovery was made in July
and
2023.
1942,
Based on the
which
family's
is hardly
account,
specific.
it is confirmed that Christopher accidentally drowned and no foul play was involved. Thanks to the effort of the Victorian Institute for Forensic Medicine and Othram, a 95-year-old case has finally been solved. Monica Faye Pritchett was born on February 16, 1979, in Anniston, Alabama. She was the daughter of Donald and Dorothy Pritchett and had 2 sisters as well as 2 brothers. Monica married Jeremy Rollins, her high school boyfriend, and they stayed in Heflin, Alabama. They had a stable marriage until the birth of their second son, Aaron, for reasons they never made public. The couple decided to live separately. This was despite Monica being pregnant with their 3rd child. Monica and the boys moved into their Sugar Hill Road home in mid-2001. Jeremy Rollins still had visitation rights to visit his 2 sons every other weekend. Monica loved her children dearly. Dalton was 6 years old and Aaron 2 years old. She was very excited about her 3rd son's arrival in only a few weeks. Monica planned on naming him Shane. She was a busy mom, balancing a full-time job and raising her 2 sons. She worked at a daycare called Kitty Castle until July 2002, when she accepted a higher-paying job at ITC Deltacom. On Friday, September 13, 2002, Monica and her sons visited her father, Donald Pritchett, after work at his home in Anniston. He had a gift for his oldest grandson, Dalton, and could finally give it to him. The gift was a foal. Dalton named it Mojave. The evening was filled with horseback riding, playing, dinner, and conversation. At 8:30 p.m., Monica and the boys headed back to their Heflin home. They planned to return later that weekend to spend more time with Monica's father and his wife. However, when the weekend passed without any further word from Monica, relatives decided to go check and make sure everything was all right. When they arrived at Monica's mobile home on Monday morning, September 16th, nothing could have prepared them for what they would find. Monica and 6-year-old Dalton had been brutally slayed inside their home. It seemed as if Monica went into labor from shock during the attack. The baby was found partially delivered and not alive anymore. 2-year-old Aaron was found alive and unharmed, hiding in a closet. A relative called 911. The same day of the discovery, Jeremy Rollins, Monica's ex-husband, ended his 12-hour shift at Southwire around 6 p.m. and went home. A few hours later, officers arrived at his house and told him what had happened. They asked him to come to the police station. According to officials, Jeremy Rollins was quickly ruled out as a potential suspect and was cooperative throughout the investigation. After being ruled out, Jeremy said how he felt when he learned about what happened to Monica and Dalton. It was unbelievable. There where I was at, somebody was telling you something that you just cannot believe. Early press reports indicated that Monica and Dalton had both lost their lives due to stab wounds received at some point over the weekend. Everybody pretty much knows everybody when you live in a small town, and with a population of less than 3,500 people, Heflin is one of those towns. When something as horrible as a triple slaying occurs somewhere like Heflin, it rocks the very foundation of the community, especially when the victims were a young pregnant mother, her 6-year-old son, and her unborn son. The crime terrified the community, and people started improving security measures on their homes and kept their kids inside. Family members described Monica as an easygoing, loving mother who was always smiling and good with kids. Debbie Clark, owner and director of Kitty Castle, said, "She was just always smiling, just a good person. Her little boy, he was so precious." Funeral services were held for both Monica and Dalton on September 19, 2002 at Dryden Funeral Home Chapel. They were set to be buried at the Cedar Creek Cemetery, but prior to the burial, investigators decided they needed to collect more DNA for investigative purposes. On September 20, 2002, Governor Siegelman offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person who committed this terrible crime. Very few details about the slaying were made public, even years later. The Heflin Police Department kept the details confidential as an investigative technique. They believed that the perpetrator would one day mention something about the slaying that was never made public, leading to an arrest. Captain Joe Neighbors of the Alabama Bureau of Investigation confirmed that DNA, fingerprints, and other evidence had been collected at the scene and were sent to the Alabama Department of Forensic Science for analysis. At the time, the department was facing serious backlog issues due to budget constraints, which created a delay in processing. In June 2014, Heflin Police Chief A.J. Benefield contacted the Attorney General Office's Cold Case Unit, and the two agencies started working together. Based on new information, they began to interview people again. They met with the State Bureau of Investigation and local prosecutors and started new discussions. Police Chief Benefield was an officer at the time of the slayings. He and his partner responded to the 911 call of the relative who found Monica and her son's bodies. When talking about the case in 2014, Benefield had this to say: "So really, there were 3 victims. It was the worst crime scene I have ever seen. Not a day goes by that we are not talking about this or working on it in some way. It is very near to our hearts." In 2015, Benefield hinted that they were looking at someone that they have known about since 2002, but he did not elaborate further. In March 2015, the Alabama Attorney General's office joined the investigation. Authorities periodically posted on social media asking for information on the case. Unfortunately, no useful leads came in, and the case went cold for some time. In 2021, the case was reopened by Chief McGlone and Captain Scott Bonner. They resent multiple items to forensic labs, both private and state. They continued to keep close contact with some of the family members and tried their best to provide support as much as they could. Although they could not go into specific details due to the ongoing investigation, Captain Scott Bonner said there was a suspect and evidence. There is no threat to anyone from the suspect in this case at this time. The suspect, who I cannot name yet, is in jail in another state for unrelated crimes, he said. With help from the state, grant money from Seasons of Justice, and a literal truckload of evidence, investigators were able to make an arrest more than 20 years after the crime. Louis Landon Spivey was arrested on June 26, 2023, and charged with taking the lives of Monica, Dalton, and Shane. On June 30, 2023, Heflin Police Department made the announcement to the public. Louis Spivey kept the sordid secret to himself until he was released from a Florida prison. He is now 39 years old and was 18 years old when he committed that horrendous crime in 2002. They were acquaintances, Captain Bonner said in a press conference. They had a relationship. Bonner did not reveal a motive or the circumstances leading up to the slayings. For the last 15 years, Louis Spivey has been sitting in a Florida prison cell for an unrelated robbery and aggravated assault case out of Bay County, for which he was sentenced in February 2010. Captain Bonner and Chief McGlone took Louis Spivey into custody after his release from the Florida prison. Captain Bonner explained, Louis Spivey has since cooperated with the investigation. He was looked at early on in the investigation by other agencies before we opened up the case. Good investigation work gave us some good leads. We did not have surveillance. Surveillance? Pictures? Or cameras? Said Bonner. We did not have the things that you would have nowadays. When investigators sat down with Louis Spivey, he allegedly gave them a complete confession, outlined the crime, and took sole responsibility for the slayings. A bond hearing was held on June 29, 2023. The court determined that the criteria for invoking Anaya's law had been met, leading to Louis Spivey's continued pre-trial confinement without the possibility of bond. Anaya's law is a legislation named after Anaya Blanchard, a college student whose life was tragically taken in 2019. The law aims to enhance penalties for certain violent offenses in Alabama. It allows judges to deny bail or parole for individuals charged with certain violent crimes, ensuring that they remain in custody throughout their trial process. The law seeks to prioritize public safety and protect potential victims by keeping individuals considered dangerous off the streets during legal proceedings. Investigators gave few details on what led to the break in the case, but we do know about the confession and that the department was given a grant for DNA analysis, and several items were processed by a state lab and private labs in Canada. In a statement on behalf of Mayor Robbie Brown, Chief Ross McGlone offered his condolences to the family of Monica and Dalton. Hopefully this will bring you some sense of closure to this awful chapter in your lives. We would like to extend our deepest gratitude and appreciation to Captain Bonner, the Heflin Police Department, and all the other agencies and individuals who displayed unwavering dedication and determination in their pursuit of justice for Monica, Dalton, and their grieving family. It was definitely the hardest case, and I have worked several similar cases in my career, explained investigator and Captain Scott Bonner. The box of reports and everything we had to go through, that alone took several months. This case proved to become personal to Bonner. He admitted he has probably spent more time with Monica and Dalton's family over the last 3 years than he had with his own. I have become really close to them, he said. It makes me feel great that I can give them some peace. Jeremy Rollins, Monica's ex-husband, remarried in 2011 and has twin daughters with his wife. Aaron Rollins, Monica's second son, graduated high school in 2018 and is now in his early 20s. The family still resides in Heflin. Louis Spivey was transferred to the Cleburne County Jail, where he is now being held without bail and awaiting trial. In June 1994, a 39-year-old victim reported to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in North Carolina that an unknown man had broken into her residence and assaulted her at knife point. Male DNA was collected from her body and tested, but DNA technology was not advanced enough at the time to identify the attacker. Additional testing of the evidence was conducted in 2018. In 2019, The forensic samples from the scene were linked to another assault in Columbia, South Carolina that took place in 2010. In 2022, detectives utilized forensic genetic genealogy to identify a person of interest. Forensic evidence was then sent to Othram. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the unknown man. Their in-house genealogy team used a genetic genealogy search to produce investigative leads that were returned to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Investigators continued working the case, and their follow-up investigative efforts led to the collection of a DNA sample from a person of interest. The DNA profile for this person of interest matched the DNA profiles for the unknown subject that were recovered from the 1994 and 2010 assaults. As a result of years of extensive forensic testing and evidence examination, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Crime Lab and Cold Case Unit identified the suspect as James Wayne Ingersoll. He was born on November 6, 1972. In May 2023, members of the police department's Violent Criminal Apprehension Team located and apprehended Ingersoll in Concord, North Carolina. South Carolina Law Enforcement Division and the Columbia Police Department also assisted. The victims have been notified of the arrest. The investigation into this case is active and ongoing. As additional information develops, it will be released by the CMPD's Public Affairs Office. Tips and speak directly to a detective. The public can also leave information anonymously by contacting Crime Stoppers at 704-334-1600. Investigators want to know if James Wayne Ingersoll could be responsible for any other crimes. Destiny Renee Pittman was born in Kokomo, Indiana on January 9, 1992, to parents Melvin Douglas and Carla Pittman McCombs. Destiny was one of 5 children and had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. In 2013, at the age of 21, Destiny was staying with her 2 young children, her boyfriend, a female roommate, and 3 dogs in 815 James Drive, Kokomo. On the evening of February 7, 2013, 2 armed intruders forced their way into Destiny's home. Destiny stepped out from her bedroom into the hallway to confront the intruders. She was then fatally shot by one of the attackers. The bullet went through her chest and struck a wall at the end of the hall. Renee's boyfriend, roommate, children, and dogs were at home at the time, but hid away out of fear and were unharmed. At approximately 9:33 p.m., officers from the Kokomo Police Department were dispatched to 815 James Drive when they were notified about shots being fired at the residence. When officers arrived at the crime scene, Destiny was already gone, and there was nothing they could do to revive her. A single .40 caliber shell casing was recovered. Neither her boyfriend, whose name was never disclosed, or roommate saw the intruders and could thus not give investigators any description. It was suspected that the perpetrators may have been looking to rob Destiny and her boyfriend of marijuana and cash they had from selling weed. Destiny's boyfriend reportedly admitted to police that he sold marijuana and had taken a bag containing weed and over $2,000 in cash to another house just days prior to the home invasion. Both the boyfriend and the roommate also admitted to police that Destiny, too, was involved in selling, but had not as much since she inherited money. Unfortunately, investigators were unable to identify the attackers, and the case went cold. For more than 10 years, Destiny's case remained unsolved without a single suspect ever being identified. Destiny's demise left her surviving family and friends devastated. Even years after, her mom stayed depressed and cried a lot. "I hope and pray to God someone will have something to say," she said. "My life has turned absolutely upside down. They took my child for no reason. Whoever it was, I hope they are satisfied. They did not get anything out of it. She was just getting ready to start modeling and have a life for herself." Her mother said, not knowing who did this to her daughter or why eats at her each and every day. On March 2, 2023, 2 men were finally identified as suspects in Destiny Pittman's case. Investigators announced the arrest of 32-year-old Joey McCartney and 36-year-old Jesse McCartney. Joey McCartney was taken into custody by U.S. Marshals at the crack of dawn at a residence in Graham, Kentucky. Jesse McCartney was arrested by U.S. Marshals and local police roughly 2 hours later at a residence in Kokomo. Graham and Kokomo are more than a 4-hour drive apart. As a result of the continued investigation since 2013, along with citizens continuing to provide leads, investigators with the Criminal Investigation Section were able to determine that these two individuals were responsible for what happened to Destiny. On December 5, 2022, a woman called in and claimed to have information about Destiny's case. She told police she could not keep this information to herself anymore after repeatedly seeing press releases on the case over the years. According to the court documents, this informant claimed to have been with Jesse McCartney on the night Destiny's life was ended and had been sitting in his white Jeep Cherokee outside Destiny's home. According to the informant, Jesse and Joey said they were running an errand, which the individual reportedly believed meant a deal that involved illegal substances. Jesse reportedly told the informant to stay inside the vehicle while he proceeded to put on black leather gloves and grabbed his handgun. Joey McCartney met Jesse at Destiny's front door before the pair entered the residence. The two of them then started searching the home, which police believe it was for substances that Destiny and her boyfriend were selling. The informant heard a gunshot and saw both men come running out of the house. Jesse was sweating heavily and had a large bag of marijuana and cash in his hand. According to the informant, she alleges that she and Jesse drove back to his apartment and Joey joined them. She said Jesse then made her drive back by the home the next day. When they drove past, there was police tape surrounding the house. The informant also told police about Jesse McCartney changing his phone number and said he still lived in Kokomo on Monroe Street. She said he sold his gun and Jeep 6 months later after the crime was committed. The woman told investigators she did not come forward sooner because she was scared and still is. She had an alleged history with Jesse. Police showed Destiny's boyfriend photographs of Joey and Jesse McCartney after the new revelations. The boyfriend stated that Joey looked familiar and might have visited before with a common friend, but it was still unclear to investigators whether Destiny knew the McCartneys. The two men each faced charges for taking Destiny's life as well as burglary. Jesse McCartney faced additional charges of robbery and possession of illegal substances. The brothers were held without bond for the alleged connection to the case, with their hearing taking place in March 2023. Jesse McCartney's trial took place on August 11, 2023, and he was acquitted of some of the charges against him since it was determined he was not the one that shot Destiny. Joey McCartney's trial is yet to take place. 12-year-old Jennifer Renee Odom was a 7th grader at Thomas E. Whiteman Middle School in Wesley Chapel, Florida, in 1993. She played the clarinet in a school band, and she was also a barefoot water skier who placed high in tournaments. Often, she was the skier who climbed to the top of the human pyramid, gliding atop the water. Jennifer was born on August 25, 1980. She was the eldest daughter of Renee Converse and stepdad Clark Converse. She had a 9-year-old sister, Jessica and Odom, and was the granddaughter of Jim and Margie Denny. They lived in St. Joseph, a small community near Dade City, Florida. Jennifer and Jessica had a rabbit called Beanie. Jennifer also absolutely loved her Springer Spaniel, Gypsy. The two sisters built forts, rode four-wheelers, and spent summer days swimming in the creek behind their house on the family's 15-acre property. It was a crisp morning on Friday, February 19, 1993, when Jennifer Odom put on her white jeans and white turtleneck in order to get ready for school. She put a red cashmere sweater, a gift from her grandmother, over her shoulder-length chestnut-color hair. She was slim and tan due to spending a lot of time outdoors. On that same morning, after lacing up her pair of black boots, she got into the car with her mother. The two drove 200 yards up the winding lime rock driveway to wait for the school bus near their mailbox. Jennifer climbed onto the bus and took her usual spot on the back seat so she and her mother could see each other until Renee, following behind, turned left to head to work. After school, at around 3 p.m., Jennifer stepped off her school bus, waved goodbye to her friends, and started walking the short 200 yards to her home. At about 4 p.m., Jennifer's sister arrived at their home from school to find it locked and unable to enter. She then called their mother to tell her that her big sister was not home yet. Renee Converse then realized Jennifer must not have made it home. She called Jennifer's best friend, Michelle. who stated that she saw Jennifer exit the bus and begin walking home. Jennifer's mother knew something was very wrong and called the police. Within hours, deputies launched a wide-scale search. A search party of about 400 volunteers was formed to help scour about 60 square miles of countryside. Family, friends, neighbors, and other volunteers searched for Jennifer. Law enforcement was equipped with police dogs to fine-comb the rolling groves, pastures, and woods surrounding the tiny Pasco County town of Dade City. Every law enforcement agency in the Bay Area was looking for a blue truck that was seen in the area by some of her classmates. Children riding the school bus with Jennifer remembered seeing an older, light blue, unknown model, pickup truck, slowly following Jennifer down the road in the direction in which she was walking. The children described it as having a silver-painted rear bumper, not chrome, and a trailer hitch with wires hanging and pipes or a ladder in the back. The driver was described by the children as a white male in his 40s with shoulder-length brown hair. The blue truck was the focus of the search parties, as investigators believed that the driver may have been involved in the disappearance of Jennifer. As a last resort to find the truck, the FBI as well as Hernando and Pasco County Sheriff's personnel worked from a dock and boathouse, as drivers searched Lake Jovita for the vehicle. 6 days after Jennifer vanished, on Thursday, February 25th, a man and a woman searching an abandoned orange grove about 10 miles north of Jennifer's school bus stop found her badly decomposed nude body. Her body was found near a horse trail off Powell Road south of Brooksville amid a cluster of pine trees in the orange grove. She was found viciously assaulted and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. Detectives said she likely lost her life there in the woods, not long after her disappearance. Hernando County Sheriff El Ninhu has stated, "We are not exactly sure how long her abductor kept her captive or when exactly the slaying took place, but we are relatively confident it took place in that field." He added, "Every one of us, including those in law enforcement, can look at Jennifer as our niece, our sister, our granddaughter, and realize that it is a tragedy beyond tragedy." Jennifer's clothing was never found, neither the blue truck nor its driver. While Jennifer's family was still busy with her funeral arrangements, country music star Vince Gill was scheduled to sing at the local Strawberry Festival on Monday, March 1st, 1993. Jennifer's stepfather, Clark Converse, said the girls had looked forward to Gill's performance for weeks, hoping they could get him to autograph photos. Before the concert, Clark Converse and Jessica went to the festival to fulfill Jennifer's wish that Gill autograph a photo in which Jennifer and her sister had posed with the singer at a previous concert on January 10th. Between shows, festival vice president Joe Newsom took the 3 snapshots to Gill, who was eating dinner. Jennifer's stepdad had asked that Gill autograph one for Jessica, one for Jennifer, and one for both girls. Newsom said afterwards, "I told Gill this young lady had been slayed and her dad was outside." Gill replied that he remembered hearing about the incident. He, who also had a young daughter, autographed the photos, writing on one, to Jennifer, "May God be with you," as both Gill and Newsom wept. Gill then went to the night's second show. Before singing the last song, he told the audience about Jennifer. "I'm going to try to get through this the best I can," he said, his voice cracking. Gill sang his Grammy-winning hit, "I Still Believe in You," and dedicated it to Jennifer, who was tragically robbed of her life. Midway through the song, with tears running down his face, Gill asked the crowd to help him finish. Nearly 15,000 voices joined in. Radio personality Jeff Moore stood backstage and looked out at thousands of tear-stained faces. "It was heart-ripping," he said afterwards. Unfortunately, with no one in the community providing investigators with useful information, her case went unsolved. 13 months before Jennifer was abducted, on January 16, 1992, a 17-year-old girl was kidnapped as she got off a school bus in north-central Pasco County. She was found in a pool of blood behind an abandoned house, brutally attacked, assaulted, and beaten. Sheriff Ninhu has said she suffered injuries to her head and skull that were very significant. She survived, but her life was forever changed as she was paralyzed on her left side. Ninhu has said she was a former honor roll student and track and field participant and was a true victim. She was not engaged in a high-risk lifestyle. Law enforcement was able to collect DNA from the crime scene at the time. Since there were similarities between what happened to Jennifer and the unnamed girl, detectives believed the cases may be related. Both victims were adolescent girls who were abducted after getting off of the school bus in Pasco County, taken to a remote field, assaulted, and abandoned with the belief they will succumb to their injuries. The other victim was found just a few miles from where Jennifer's body was found. After a series of blind alleys, the police called upon psychic Nancy Meyer 16 months after the incident to assist in finding the person responsible for what happened. Nancy Meyer is a psychic from Pennsylvania who has been working with police around the country for decades. According to Nancy, she had consulted in more than 300 criminal investigations and had offered critical clues more than 80% of the time. Nancy believed that two men were involved in taking. She described them as white, muscular mechanics, and she said one may be a smoker with a heavy cough. The crime scene photographs were classified. Therefore, Nancy Meyer was not allowed to see it. Despite this, she was able to visualize two men in detail. She was taken to the site where Jennifer's body was found. Nancy pointed out that there were belongings in a nearby area that had not yet been discovered. She was able to describe several of Jennifer's items that were still missing, including her cousin's clarinet case with the letters LO on them. She continued to give information about the perpetrators in hope of solving the case. Detective Carlos Douglas of the Hernando County Sheriff's Office said, Nancy Meyer was extremely accurate on some things that led us to look in other areas that we had not thought of. So we obtained a lot of information from what she had to offer. On December 2, 1994, Jennifer's unsolved case was aired on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on national TV. After the show aired, more than 50 phone tips and even more investigative leads from around the country arrived by mail at the Hernando County Sheriff's Office. A spokesman of the sheriff's office said, "The show did for us what we wanted it to do. It got us some more exposure." Despite the new exposure, former Hernando County Sheriff's Major Gary Zorn Smith, who oversaw the investigation in its early years, said that investigators were stumped. He said there was a strong possibility the crime would go unsolved. And what's even worse is that if we solve it, it may take another crime to do it, he said at the time. Approximately 2 years after Jennifer's body was found, on Thursday, January 5, 1995, a couple hunting for scrap metal in a rural area of Hernando County discovered Jennifer's missing book bag and clarinet case. It was found several miles from the location of her body. Police were able to lift fingerprints from her backpack and clarinet case from what is believed to be the person responsible. Unfortunately, there was never a hit in the database for a suspect matching these fingerprints. Over the years, the case garnered national attention and haunted the Tampa Bay region. Thousands of dollars in reward money offered for tips went unclaimed. Detectives logged tens of thousands of hours chasing leads. Jennifer's family waited for news as the years turned to decades. Jennifer's mother, Renee Converse, wondered if it was somebody Jennifer knew. Clark Converse, Jennifer's stepfather, added, "There is a real chance that the person who did it is somebody we have contact with. If they catch someone, we're going to be thrown into the spotlight. Learning how to deal with a trial and confronting this person is going to throw us to square one in learning to deal with this." Renee said she cries a bit more each year. The reality is that Jennifer is gone and will never be in our lives again. Nothing is going to change that. She also said that the family is thankful for what they do know. "We are blessed that we have this much closure. We are not looking for her. We know where she is." It is going to be a bittersweet finale. She could still picture her 12-year-old daughter, slim and sun-kissed, waving goodbye out the back window of the Pasco County school bus. It was the last time she would see her brown-eyed firstborn girl. Renee recounts the last words being spoken between the two as, "I love you." The couple said they have done everything possible to cooperate in finding Jennifer Slayer. They wanted the person found so that no one else got hurt. On Monday, February 19, 2007, the St. Petersburg Times reported that it marked 14 years since the unsolved abduction and subsequent slaying of Jennifer. In that same year, members of Hernando County Crime Stoppers handed out special playing cards to inmates at the Hernando County Detention Center. Each card featured a brief description of an unsolved case from around the state and a hotline number. Jennifer's card was the Queen of Diamonds and featured 2 color photos. A website has been set up by the Hernando Sheriff's Office with pictures and information about Jennifer. A slideshow was also put together with photos of Jennifer set to a mournful soundtrack. Hernando County Detective George Lloydgren later headed the cold case unit. He was armed with the latest DNA technology and a disturbing theory. I believe that there is probably one person, if not more, that would know who is responsible for this, he said. He also believed that person could be a family member or ex-spouse, either protecting the perpetrator or too afraid to come forward. I think the reason people do not want to get involved is they may not want to sit there and have to testify against that individual. Over the years, a couple of anonymous tips came in that led investigators to believe that there are several people out there with more information, and the investigators wanted them to come forward. They tried various methods of generating new leads, from billboards and a $20,000 reward to a documentary on national TV. Investigators amassed some 1,000 pieces of evidence, took thousands of tips, and conducted hundreds of interviews over time to try to determine who took Jennifer's life. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reached out to the sheriff's office and offered to scan every piece of paper in Jennifer's case so it would be readily available. It was more than 75,000 pieces of paper. During all the investigations, there were clues, including the fingerprints on Jennifer's clarinet case and backpack. There were also suspects. Serial offender Frank Theniel Potts was a possible suspect. He assaulted a 10-year-old girl in Lakeland in 1993. At the time of the slaying, he was working on a construction site in Pasco County and owned a blue pickup truck, which he allegedly later dismantled. Authorities were unable to link him to Jennifer's case. However, another possible suspect was Walter Ducharme, who lived in the area at the time of the slaying. His ex-wife claimed that he was responsible for it. However, her testimony was inconsistent. When the case against him was presented to a grand jury, he was not indicted. He was no longer believed to be involved in the case. In February 2015, Detective George Lundgren was contacted by Pasco County Sheriff Chris Naco. According to him, new technology had led to a solid lead in the 1992 case in which the teenage girl was found alive. It was the case investigators believed was linked to Jennifer's. The odds of finding another match, Naco said, was 1 in 7.7 nonillion, a number with 30 zeros. Lloydgren commented, "I think DNA is going to be a big part of Jennifer's case, as it is with any of the old cases, because items were collected. It is just now that the technology has advanced. The biological evidence found in the investigation of the 1992 case was tested before February 2015, and detectives got a full DNA profile. Investigators used a DNA procedure known as familial searching, which allows law enforcement to find a suspect by comparing male DNA left at the scene with that of family members. The shortfall of a standard DNA search is that a suspect's genetic fingerprint must be on file in the offender database for law enforcement to make a match. Sheriff Ninhu has said until 2015 there were no leads on that particular piece of DNA. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement compared the DNA to local DNA to see if there were any close matches, which would be a family member. The sheriff said they found the DNA matched that of Jeffrey Crum, who was in jail at the time. Investigators then obtained DNA samples from Crum's brother, father, and grandfather. A direct comparison between the DNA found on the victim and that of Crum's father found a match. Investigators concluded that Jeffrey Crum took the girl from the 1992 case by the arm and let her be behind the abandoned house, where he hit her head with a blunt object so hard it crushed part of her skull and caused her to lose part of her brain, leaving her paralyzed on the one side. This then finally led to the arrest of Jeffrey Crum, 53 years old at the time, in connection to the 1992 case. It was Crum's arrest in this case, authorities said, that made him a person of interest, reinvigorating an investigation in Jennifer's case. Sheriff Alnienwis said, when Crum was implicated in the 1992 case, he quickly, almost instantaneously became our #1 suspect in Jennifer's case because of the similarities. He also noted that over the years there were suspects, but Crum was not on that list, so he came out of left field in 2015. In 2018, on the 25th anniversary of her daughter's demise, Jennifer's mother told the Times that she and other family members tried to have faith that her case would eventually be solved. I think the investigators would have done anything in the world to have solved this case. In 2019, Crum was sentenced to life in prison for the crime he committed in 1992, leaving his victim partly paralyzed. The victim's aunt spoke in court during the sentencing hearing, recounting the lifelong damage he had inflicted. Her aunt said her life stopped that day. She also mentioned Jennifer. A year later, a young lady, Jennifer Odom, was slayed, she said, and that brought back so much different things that today the perpetrator still has not been caught. The arrest and sentence of Crum gave Detective Lloydgren a new resolve, and Jennifer's family new hope that the person responsible will be caught. Detectives then began an intensive investigation and interviewed everyone they could find for the next several years they may have been associated with Crum around the time Jennifer was kidnapped. This information was turned over to the state attorney, and the facts and circumstances were turned over to a grand jury. On July 27, 2023, a month shy of what would have been Jennifer's 43rd birthday, officials announced that they had finally made an arrest in the case and that prosecutors would seek capital punishment against the accused. State Attorney Bill Glass made the announcement during a press conference. This was just after the Hernando County Sheriff's Office announced that it has charged the 61-year-old Jeffrey Norman Crum with the kidnapping, assault, and slaying of Jennifer 30 years before. Glass also said, "I have confidence that we have the right person and we have the right aggravators in this particular case to treat it as a capital punishment case. This is every parent's nightmare. This is the thing that keeps parents up at night worried about their children." Detective George Lloydgren, who had spent years investigating Jennifer's case, said, "Shock is probably the best word to describe the reaction of Jennifer's family when he told them about the arrest. He said he did it quickly because I did not want to get emotional. It is a lot for them to take in and absorb, and I can imagine it is going to take some time before it really sinks in." According to Sheriff Neen, who is every viable lead for the past 30 years, including those that came from the Pasco County Sheriff's Office or the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or private citizens, were investigated thoroughly. He added, "The investigation never stopped. Hundreds of items were tested and retested every time new technology came out in the hope of finding a smoking gun to solve this case." The sheriff added, "Countless, literally countless detectives and sworn law enforcement personnel and civilian and tipsters have had a hand in this investigation. The minute Crum was identified as a suspect in the case, Detective Lundgren went to work putting a mosaic together, or a puzzle, and I can tell you, other than the conviction in a previous case, there was no other piece of the puzzle. That was a big piece of the puzzle. Every other piece of the puzzle that got us to this point were tiny little fragments that gave the state attorney and the grand jury enough confidence to indict Crum." Sheriff Neen, who is also said that they are searching for additional victims. Authorities fear Crum may be responsible for other crimes. A picture of him from 1993 was released, asking that anyone who recognized him from the 1980s and 1990s to contact Sheriff Neen, who is, "We urge anyone who had interactions with this individual, has information on other crimes he may have committed, and or may have themselves been a victim of Jeffrey Crum, to reach out to the Hernando County Sheriff's Office and speak to our cold case unit." Despite keeping a lot of information close to the vest, authorities did say that in 1992, Crum worked in construction as a drywall installer and lived on Somerset Lane in Spring Hill, the Pasco County area where Jennifer was abducted from. His residence was about 21 miles from the place where Jennifer was last seen and 12 miles from where her body was found. Officials also say at that time he drove a blue truck. During Thursday, July 27, 2023's press conference, Sheriff Neen, who is kept reiterating Crum was not on the investigators' radar until the past few years. Records showed Crum has a significant history of convictions for violent crime. The sheriff said Crum had been arrested in the early 1980s for armed robbery in Hillsborough County. In 1985, he was charged with kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment in Hillsborough County. He was arrested by Tampa police in 1987 for carrying a concealed weapon. In 1988, he was caught again carrying a concealed weapon and was charged with aggravated assault. In 1998, he was arrested for domestic violence in Hernando County 3 times. In 2001, he was arrested for violation of probation in Hillsborough County. He was arrested a few years later for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in Hernando County. In 2015, he was arrested in Pasco County for aggravated assault on a child under the age of 12. Sheriff Neen has stated he is a bad individual who enjoyed violence. Crum is already serving 2 life sentences for the assault and kidnapping case out of Pasco County that was prosecuted around 2015. He is currently in the Hernando County Jail. Judge Kurt E. Hitzman ordered him to be held without bond and appointed a public defender to represent him. Communities in Pasco and Hernando counties were on edge after Jennifer Odom's kidnapping and slaying back then. They shared their thoughts and feelings after the news of the arrest was announced. Jeannie Cameron, the general manager at Papa Joe's Italian restaurant in Brooksville, said she and others in the community remember hearing about her disappearance all too well. So we all remember hearing about her disappearance, Jennifer's, and about the blue truck, and everybody was on alert about looking. I think the bottom line was finding out who did it and getting him off the streets so that another family doesn't have to be tormented. Because I really feel like the whole community was tormented until they found out the answer. Joseph Giortana, the owner of Papa Joe's Italian restaurant, said, "Back then, 30 years ago as a parent, I was very angry that someone could do something like that to a child, and then leave her there in the middle of nowhere." Jessica Ellis said she went to Whiteman Middle School with Jennifer and played in the same clarinet section in band class. "I would say we saw each other a lot. We weren't like close friends, but we knew a lot of the same people. We rode the school bus every day, and I just remember her always being nice with me and everyone else that rode her school bus that knew her. You know, a lot of us are parents ourselves now. The fact that anyone would do this to a child, it makes me hold my 5-year-old a lot tighter now." Grief and fear followed in the days, months, and years after Jennifer lost her life. Crum is closure for many in the community. Candace Lane Rogers, a 9-year-old girl attending Holmes Elementary School, lived with her mother in Spokane, Washington. On March 6, 1959, Candace was out selling mints for her Camp Fire Girl Scout troop in the neighborhood when she suddenly disappeared. Later that evening, after Candace failed to return home, her mother reported her missing. A massive search was launched with police officers, volunteers, and family members all scouring the neighborhood and surrounding areas in hopes of finding her. Helicopters were also called in to search from above, and sadly, during the search, one of the helicopters crashed, resulting in 3 casualties. 12 hours later, a police officer found 6 boxes of mints scattered near a bridge. However, there was no sign of Candace. Police would receive more than 750 tips in the following days, but none of them panned out. Her case was covered in the media, and her mother appealed to anyone who could help them provide any information into her disappearance, but to no avail. Then 16 days later, 2 hunters found Candace's shoes while hunting groundhogs in the remote woods. They notified police, and soon a search of the area found the body of Candace. She was found 12 miles away from her home. She had been buried under a pile of pine needles and brush. Her legs had been tied together at the ankles with parts of her own slip. An autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death with a piece of her own slip. Over the years, several people confessed to the murder of the child, but none of the confessions were credible. Alfred Graves and James Howard Barnett were considered suspects, but they committed suicide shortly after. The only prime suspect was Hubian Morse. Morse was a convicted serial killer and had murdered 2 Spokane women in a killing spree between 1959 and 1961. In 1955, he was charged for attempted molestation of 28-year-old girls while they were selling Girl Scout cookies in Fairfield, California. He was admitted to a Atascadero State Mental Hospital for therapy and released as cured in January of 1957. Morse submitting to killing 3 women but denied that he had anything to do with Candace's murder. In 2001, investigators were able to retrieve an unknown male's DNA from Candace's clothing. A DNA test ruled Morse out as a suspect. Police interviewed multiple suspects over the last 6 decades, but none were ever charged. In 2020, the investigators reached out to a Texas-based company, Orem Labs, who were able to build a DNA profile. The DNA profile was entered into genealogy databases, and investigators found 3 possible suspects. The suspects were all brothers but were already dead. Police learned that only one of the brothers, John Ray Hoff, had had children. The police then contacted Hoff's daughter, who agreed to provide a DNA sample. A DNA test revealed that it was 2,900,000 times more likely that Hoff's daughter was a genealogical match to the DNA sample found at the crime scene. Police then exhumed Hoff's body, and a DNA test subsequently identified John Ray Hoff as the killer. John Ray Hoff was 20 years old in 1959 and was never a suspect in Candace's murder. Hoff was a troubled teenager, and at the age of 16 he ran away from a state boys training camp near Olympia. Authorities captured Hoff and 3 other boys near Yakima. His troubles would continue even after he was married and had children. In 1970, Hoff committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. In an eerie coincidence, police learned that Candace and Hoff were both buried in the same cemetery. It was also discovered by investigators that Hoff's stepsister was Candace's big sister in her Girl Scout campfire group. Hoff's wife and daughter later took Hoff's body from the cemetery to give Candace's family some privacy. After 62 years, the case was finally solved, though it brought little peace to anyone involved. Moving on to the next case. Silas Jane. On July 2, 1966, the peaceful atmosphere of Indiana Dunes State Park turned tragic when 3 young women disappeared in broad daylight while relaxing on the beach. What was meant to be a joyful celebration of Independence Day quickly turned into a massive manhunt. The women, Renee Brull, maiden name Slanico, 19, a tall figure at 5 feet 9 inches, with brown hair and hazel eyes, along with her 2 companions, were last seen lounging in the serene surroundings of the park, which was famed for its stunning beaches, dunes, and natural beauty. But their day of relaxation would be abruptly interrupted by an unknown force, and the 3 women vanished without a trace. The location, once a serene and popular spot for both locals and tourists to enjoy the lake and lush surroundings, soon became a crime scene. The women's disappearance on the 4th of July weekend was met with confusion and fear, as a community already reveling in the holiday now faced the dark mystery. This case remains unsolved, leaving many unanswered questions about what happened to the 3 women and why they were targeted. She was last seen wearing a ruffled yellow bathing suit. And Miller, 21, was 5 feet 2 inches with brown hair and blue eyes. She was last seen wearing a 2-piece bathing suit with a red belt. Patricia Blau, 19, was 5 feet 4 inches with brown hair and brown eyes. Last seen in her bathing suit, which was brown with green flowers and golden leaves. These 3 close friends made the 60-mile drive together from their respective homes in the Chicago area and arrived at the lake around 10 a.m. and parked their car, a Buick owned by a Miller, in the lot about 100 yards from where they would set up their towel. While it was the start of a busy weekend, with the park's service estimating 9,000 people in attendance that day, the girls did not go completely unnoticed. A couple noticed them at noon that same day leave their things, including a transistor radio and a jar of tanning lotion, on their beach blanket and enter the waters of the lake. Soon after entering the lake, the couple witnessed the 3 ladies speaking with a man who was on a 14 to 16-foot boat. Soon after they began speaking to him, they boarded his boat, which had an outboard motor and blue interior, and reportedly they headed west. The couple thought nothing of this series of actions until around dusk that same day, when they noticed all the girls' belongings still laying on the beach where they had been left many hours before. This drew the couple's suspicions, as it seemed the girls had abandoned their valuables, which park rangers would later learn included cash and their car keys, and left them vulnerable to theft. The couple was so stricken by the strange behavior of the girls, having left their belongings on the beach as night fell, that they alerted a park ranger. The park ranger collected the girls, including their cigarettes, car keys, and wallets with money still in them, and stowed them safely away at the park superintendent's office, where they sat until the investigation into the girls' disappearances officially began. It was Renee's father who first raised the alarm of the missing woman, when by July 4th, 2 days later, he hadn't heard from them. Renee had specifically planned on being back before the evening of July 2nd, as she stated that she had intended to cook dinner for her husband. After families of the 3 women filed missing person reports, Park rangers went searching for the car that they arrived in and found it still sitting in the same parking space in the parking lot. Once an official search started on July 5th, more witnesses came forward having recalled seeing the girls boarding a boat. One beach tour offered his camera footage from the day, and based on those reels, police were able to pinpoint 2 boats that they believed could be involved. One was a 16 to 18-foot boat captained by a single man fitting the witness description of the man the women were seen speaking with, tan with dark hair. The other was a larger boat, 26 to 28 feet, being operated by 3 men. Both boats showed in the camera's footage had 3 female passengers on them, matching the features of the ladies. So both were considered possibilities. In fact, authorities believe that both images, taken almost 3 hours apart, could be of the women, as some witnesses say the smaller boat dropped the girls off on shore where they may have been seen eating and walking in the sand, before being approached by a separate unknown male. After talking to this separate man, all 4 were picked up by the other larger boat, a cabin cruiser, this time with 2 other men on it. Many believed it was strange that Renee's husband of 15 months didn't call in a missing persons report sooner. Rumors circulated after a note was found in Renee's purse from that day, addressed to her husband. The note complained that the husband had his priorities misaligned and that he spent too much time fixing hot rod cars with friends and not enough time on their marriage. Friends and family of the couple, though, say there were no major marriage problems and that Renee probably wrote that note when she was feeling angry in order to vent, and the fact that it was still in her purse confirms she never gave it to her husband. Renee was the only married woman of the group, but not the only one with personal problems. And Miller had told friends a few days prior that she was 3 months pregnant. She discussed her plans to enter a house for unwed mothers. She had been having an affair with a married man and, therefore, could not be with him. It is also rumored that Patricia, the third friend, was also pregnant, also by a married man. Based on these pregnancy rumors, there is a theory that the women were actually scheduled to have illegal abortions that day. One fact that substantiates this rumor is the sighting of Ralph Largo Jr., whose physical traits match the description of the man on the boat. He confirmed he was at the beach that day. Largo's aunt, with whom he lived, was in the business of performing illegal abortions for women in need. Did the woman board the boat in order to get the procedure done secretly, as it was illegal at the time in that state? Some wonder if the procedure went awry and caused the death of the girls, which needed to be covered up. But then what happened to Renee? Was she pregnant too? That would be a huge coincidence. Or did she witness the deaths and need to be quieted as well? Ralph Largo Jr. died in 2009, so he can provide no answers. Another theory is that the boat they were on encountered trouble and crashed. Some debris from an apparent boating accident were found near Bailey Generating Station of Northern Indiana Public Service Company on Lake Michigan a few days after July 2nd. However, the families of the 3 girls say that accidental drowning was not likely, as all 3 girls were experienced swimmers. In fact, Patricia was known to be able to swim 20 miles in one day with and having similar skills. There's another angle to this case, the so-called horse syndicate connection. This theory involves the 3 ladies' common love, riding and caring for horses. All 3 ladies frequented the Tricolor stables in Palatine, Illinois, and knew George Jane, who was a well-known and wealthy horse dealer. George Jane had a bitter feud over horse finances with his brother, Silas Jane, a notorious leader of the so-called horse syndicate, an underground club of some sort that dealt with the buying, selling, and betting of racehorses. The brothers' frequent and intense fighting had actually resulted in the death of a young woman months prior. Cheryl Enrod, a successful equestrian, was asked by George to move his Cadillac for him, but in carrying out this task for him, she got into a car that was rigged with explosives. The car bomb was triggered by the engine starting and Cheryl was killed instantly. The bomb was thought to be placed by an associate of Silas's and meant for George as retaliation for some horse-related feud they had been having. Court documents show that the prosecution believed an arsonist was paid $10,000 to place the bomb that killed Cheryl, and the arsonist was subsequently sentenced to life in prison almost 30 years after the actual crime. George was so fearful of a subsequent car bomb attack that he rigged a tool that could turn on a car's ignition without physically getting in the vehicle. It is theorized that the 3 missing women may have witnessed the planting of this bomb or some other nefarious act, and that their deaths were related to the incident. The girls also rode at Silas' stable, even though they boarded their horses at George's stable. For months prior, when Renee came home with a facial injury, she cryptically blamed the laceration on issues with the syndicate people. Additionally, the phone numbers of both George and Silas Shane were found among the girls' abandoned possessions. Eliminating witnesses would not be out of character for Silas Jane, who was known to be cold-blooded, cunning, and brutal. The owner of a rival horse training business, Idle Hour Stable, he had a reputation for taking advantage of the young women of rich Chicago parents who desired to learn to ride and had no shame in mixing his criminal activities with his stable. Silas is connected to numerous felonies, including the rape of a young woman while he was a teenager, conspiracy to kill his brother George, covering up his employee's murder of 3 young boys known as the Peterson-Schulitzer murders, and a shootout with police that resulted in the death of an officer. Silas is also connected to the death of an older woman, Helen Brock, who spent over $250,000 on horses and may have gotten caught up with Silas's horse gang, known sometimes as the Horse Syndicate and other times as the Jane Gang. Silas was said to be a sociopath with early childhood proclivities for murder. At the young age of 8, he was bitten by a goose on his family farm and was so enraged that he killed each and every goose on the property. At least 11 horse deaths are also connected to him, and he seemed to take his anger at his brother out on his brother's prized horses, including the burning of 10 of them alive in George's barn. He also injected 1 prize-winning mare with turpentine. Given the long list of deaths that followed his career, it is not hard to imagine him being involved with the missing women. George, his brother, was shot to death while at his son's birthday party. The mysterious disappearance of the 3 women at Indiana Dunes State Park in 1966 remains one of the state's most haunting unsolved cases. In a bizarre twist, Silas, a man with a known criminal background, allegedly told the sheriff before his death in 1987 that he had buried 3 bodies under his stable. However, before any investigation could be launched, the sheriff tragically died in a farming accident, and no one ever followed up on this chilling statement. Further complicating the case, Silas owned a boat that matched the descriptions of when the women were reportedly seen boarding, raising suspicions about his possible involvement. Despite his dark past, there is no solid evidence directly linking him to the women's disappearance. With no bodies found and the absence of concrete clues, the case remains frustratingly unresolved. Though it remains open, the investigation is inactive and the families of the missing women continue to hope that new evidence will emerge to finally provide answers. Until then, the case lingers as a haunting reminder of the unknown fate of the 3 young women. Moving on to the next case. Helen Brzezinski, a 20-year-old woman from Massachusetts, was studying at Wheaton College in her home state. In January 1980, she moved to Colorado to work as an intern at a Denver radio station, embarking on the beginning of her adult life. Helen was living with a friend at her aunt's house in Englewood, Colorado. On January 16, 1980, Helen went to work. After work, she took the bus like usual. She was not seen again after leaving the bus station. Helen's aunt got worried when she did not arrive home and reported her missing. It did not take long for police to find her. Her body was found the next day in a field. She had been stabbed, investigators believed, as she was abducted right after she left the bus station. DNA from a male was found at a crime scene. Unfortunately, in 1980, DNA technology was not very advanced and they could not identify the man. They did, however, store the DNA so they can one day use it again when DNA technology has advanced. Helen did not know a lot of people in the area since she only lived there for 2 weeks and did not have any known enemies. Investigators did not receive a lot of leads and the case went cold. In 1998, the DNA were uploaded to her database after a DNA profile could be created, but it did not match to anyone. In 2017, her case was reopened and investigators tried again to solve her case. They uploaded the DNA to jetmatch.com and phoned a couple of potential family members of the suspect. One of the family members they came across was Rob Deal. Rob was very eager to help. He explained his entire family tree as best he could and gave them a sample of his DNA. The investigators then used the help of C.C. Moore and Parabon Nanolabs to find a family member who would give them an exact match. In December 2019, they really narrowed it down to James Curtis Glanton. He was a very distant cousin of Rob. James was a truck driver living in Lake Butler, Florida. Investigators saw that he had a criminal history and found that he was on parole for an assault in Arkansas after serving 4 years in prison in 1980. He was released to live in a Denver home of a former counselor who offered to help him. This meant that he was in the area when Helen's life was taken, and that he had a violent history. Investigators followed James for a few weeks. They retrieved a beer mug that he was drinking from at a bar. The DNA was tested and it was an exact match. Early in 2020, James was arrested. We're now also looking into other possible crimes he could be responsible for. Helen's sister, Janet Johnson, is now the only living close relative of Helen. At 70 years old, Janet was overjoyed to hear news about the case and expressed her deep love for her sister. "I want people to know what a special person Helen was. She was my best friend and she had a bright future ahead of her," Janet shared. Moving on to the next case. Kelly and Workman. Kelly and Workman was a 24-year-old woman living with her parents in Douglas County, Missouri. Described as quiet, independent, and determined, Kelly was the daughter of dairy farmers and was always willing to help with farm tasks. To supplement her income, she offered lawn care and maintenance services, often working on yards and properties in the Dogwood area. On June 30th, 1989, Kelly was mowing the grass at Dogwood Cemetery, located next to Pleasant Southern Baptist Church. Known for her attention to detail, she carefully mowed around the rows of headstones and used trimmers to cut stray blades of grass around each marker. This was a routine task for Kelly, but it would tragically mark the last day she was seen alive. She began her work at 3:30 p.m., and at around 5 p.m., it started raining. So, Kelly went home to feed the calves while her parents milked the cows at their rented Seymour farm. When the rain stopped at 5:40, Kelly was back at the cemetery. Her uncle saw her mowing as he drove past the lot on Missouri 14 in Douglas County. This was the last time Kelly was ever seen alive. 20 minutes later, with less than half of the job completed, it appears that Kelly left the mower beside a tombstone and disappeared from the cemetery. When she failed to return home for dinner later that night, her parents became worried and reported her missing to the police. However, police told her parents to wait as they suggested Kelly might have run away. Her parents vehemently disagreed as Kelly was dependable and would not have left her work unfinished, nor would she have left her tools simply sitting out in the cemetery. Her parents and friends organized their own searches and soon, despite suggesting that Kelly had run away, the police launched their own countywide search in and around Douglas. Kelly's 1986 Oldsmobile was soon found in the church connected to the cemetery's parking lot with its key in the ignition. For several days, the search involved hundreds of volunteers as well as sent tracking dogs and helicopters, which scoured the countryside. However, nothing would be found. Then 7 days later, on July 7th, a farmer and his son in nearby Christian County stumbled upon Kelly's remains submerged in water from the waist down. Her body was found about 10 miles from where she disappeared. She was found fully clothed, but so badly decomposed that it took dental records to identify her. How she died remains murky. Her death certificate merely lists, quote, homicidal violence. Authorities believe that Kelly was abducted from the cemetery with the motive of sexual assault. However, at the time, the autopsy stated she was not sexually assaulted. It was only more recently that investigators confirmed Kelly was indeed sexually assaulted. They say she probably died in the early hours of July 1st. However, due to the advanced state of decomposition, they could neither determine the time nor the cause of death. Kelly's mother, Joan Workman, believes she knows the exact moment Kelly died. She said that after reporting her daughter missing on July 1st at 3:30 a.m., as she sat on the living room couch and worried about Kelly with family and friends, she felt a surge of panic and pain in her chest. She says that she thought to herself, "Hang on, Kelly, hang on." But then she says the feeling passed, leaving her as she described feeling dead inside. Kelly's body was interred at the Dogwood Cemetery, which she so lovingly helped maintain. Kelly's parents harbored frustration towards the Douglas County Sheriff's Department, feeling that had the police treated the case with the gravity it deserved from the onset, there might have been a chance to save Kelly. Their anger stemmed partially from the police's failure to dust Kelly's 1986 Oldsmobile Cutlass for fingerprints. Moreover, they expressed disappointment that crucial pieces of information, such as reports of a screaming woman, were overlooked amid the chaos of the initial night. A few months later, Kelly's mother learned that 4 days after Kelly's abduction, an anonymous caller reached out to her home leaving a message with another family member regarding a sighting of someone at the Workman residence on the afternoon of the abduction. Surprisingly, the caller did not reach out to any law enforcement agencies involved, and Joan believes that her daughter might have known her abductor or abductors. A reward of $10,000 was offered. Police questioned several suspects over the years, but no one was ever charged. There were 2 suspects who were repeatedly questioned in Kelly's murder. Dwight and Bobby Banks. Dwight and Bobby Banks were 2 brothers who had been pulled over by a Missouri Highway Patrol officer in 1990 as they were traveling down the highway in a pickup truck on the night of Kelly's disappearance. It is unclear why they were initially suspected in Kelly's murder, but Dwight Banks was asked by police to take a polygraph test regarding the murder, and he agreed to take it. He reportedly passed the test. A few years later, Dwight alongside his brother Bobby again became suspects after Dwight reportedly confessed to several people that he murdered Kelly. In a 1995 article from the Springfield News Leader, it was reported that Dwight had confessed multiple times to killing Kelly. However, he later asserted that these confessions were made in jest, attributing them to him being under the influence of alcohol at the time. Dwight admitted that he and Bobby saw Kelly just a few hours before she was abducted when she had been working, but he said he did not kill her. Dwight Banks added that his brother Bobby is also innocent. At the time of Kelly's disappearance, Dwight Banks told the news leader that he and Bobby were at his house eating fried chicken. However, the newspaper, the News Leader, also reported that authorities have been told that Dwight Banks may have taken drugs before the 1990 polygraph examination, which he had passed. Later, Dwight's brother Bobby asked an ex-girlfriend of his to provide an alibi for him for the evening Kelly went missing, which she later reported to police. It was reported that Bobby Banks failed polygraph tests, which Dwight Banks attributed to his brother's frail emotions. 9 years later, the Missouri Highway Patrol Crime Lab issued a warrant for 2 men, one of which was Dwight seeking DNA evidence allegedly connecting him to the killing. However, the tests did not yield any conclusive findings. On February 20th, 2024, authorities said at a news conference that 3 men had been arrested and indicted on charges of first-degree murder, along with charges of forcible rape and first-degree kidnapping. The 3 men were identified as Wiley Belt and the initial suspects, brothers Dwight Banks and Bobby Banks. The case took a major turn when an eyewitness from the community bravely came forward, providing critical evidence that enabled investigators to present the case to a grand jury. This led to the arrest of 3 men, all in their mid-60s at the time. The suspects, identified as the Banks brothers and a man named Belt, are currently being held at the Douglas County Jail in Ava. Each of them faces a $250,000 cash bond while awaiting further legal proceedings. The community's involvement played a crucial role in bringing the case closer to justice. Moving on to the next case. Akia Edelstein. At just 22 years old, Akia Edelstein was a devoted mother living in Baltimore, Maryland, in 2017. She had a young daughter and was expecting another child with 36-year-old Michael Robertson. On May 7, 2017, concerns swept through her family when Akia failed to appear at her own baby shower. It was soon uncovered that she had last been seen alive on May 3, 2017, 24 days before her family reported her missing. Investigators decided to create a timeline of events leading up to her disappearance, and also took a closer look at her unborn baby's father, Michael Robertson. Akia and Robertson first met in the 1990s when his grandmother babysat her as a child. They reconnected in 2016 and began dating. At the same time, Robertson was in a relationship with a 22-year-old woman. That woman had recently given birth to the couple's second child. Investigators learned that Achiel was under the impression that she was going to move in with Robertson and was excited about it. Robertson sent her pictures of an apartment interior on May 2, 2017. About 1:24 p.m. that day, Akia purchased 2 money orders totaling $450 after making several ATM withdrawals from her savings account. Moments later, Akia messaged Robertson on Facebook. "Called you. I got the money order." That afternoon, Akia unsuccessfully attempted to withdraw cash twice from an ATM at a Wells Fargo location downtown. Akia and Robertson were texting back and forth on May 3rd. That day, Akia was seen on surveillance video depositing the 2 money orders and a paycheck from her employer at a BB&T location in the Central Business District. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Then she withdrew $450. Akia told a bank employee, whom she knew from high school, that she had to cash the orders because the property manager only takes cash. It is believed she was referring to the property that Robertson told her they are moving into. At about 4 p.m., Robertson took a lift order by Akia to the Cherry Hill neighborhood. Phone records indicate Robertson was in the area near Akia's residence from 5:35 p.m. to 6:18 p.m. At about 5:22 p.m., Akia sent a friend an invite to her baby shower on the following Sunday. It was her last known communication. Phone records show a telemarketer tried to call Akia at 6:57 p.m. At that time, both her phone and Robertson's phone were located downtown. Akia's phone activity ends there, indicating that the device was turned off or disabled. Using a reverse image search, investigators determined the apartment picture Robertson had sent the day before was a completely different residence from the one he had named. Investigators learned of a volatile argument between Robertson and the mother of his children the night before Akia disappeared. When investigators looked at what could have sparked the argument, they saw that evening Akia shared a sonogram picture on Facebook. On the day of Akia's shower, family members said that they found her apartment nearly clean out. Police first thought that this was a clue that she walked off on her own. That was before they learned that Robertson made Akia believe that they were going to move in together. Robertson was interviewed several times during the investigation, but notably has displayed a consistent pattern of hiding or avoiding police contact for weeks or months at a time between interviews. During an interview on June 15, 2017, he claimed he saw Akia on Monday, May 1st. But we know that this is false because of the phone records. In July of 2017, a police spokesman said that investigators no longer believe that she walked off on her own and had come to believe that there was foul play. After years of collecting all the telephone records, financial records, social media messages, and conducting multiple interviews, investigators had enough evidence to arrest Michael Robertson in connection to Akia's disappearance. Authorities arrested Robertson and charged him with taking Akia's life on February 1, 2022. 2 days later, on February 3rd, Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby held a press conference to announce the arrest of Robertson. Mosby said, "Give a special thanks to the family of Akia Eggleston for never giving up in their pursuit of justice for Akia and her unborn child." The state's attorney office released the full statement of probable cause in Akia's case. It reads as follows: based on her pattern of life, the time passed, extensive publicity, and multiple searches and monetary rewards for information in this case. The document stated the fact that Akia has not returned to her family or been electronically or physically located overwhelmingly indicates that she is in fact deceased. The document details Akia's last days as revealed by interviews, financial records, telephone records, and social media communications, and alleges that the investigation revealed the only person with the motive, means, an opportunity to take Akia's life was the purported father of her unborn child, Michael Robertson. While Akia's body has not been found, the statement of probable cause revealed that in October of 2017, following the airing of a local television news report on Akia's case, Robertson's Google searches for "where does Baltimore City trash go when picked up," "Baltimore City dumpster pickup," and "Baltimore City landfill" indicate what may have happened to her remains. Michael Robertson is being held on bond in Michigan, where he currently resides. In its press release, the Baltimore State's Attorney's Office stated that Robertson faces a maximum penalty of 2 life sentences in prison if found guilty of all charges. Supervisor Special Agent Shane Butchwald with the FBI of Baltimore also spoke. For nearly 5 years, the people of Baltimore have searched, hoped, and mourned with Akia's family and friends, she said. But they never gave up, and neither did we. Buchenwald added that while Akia's body still hasn't been found, we hope this arrest brings a level of comfort and closure to Akia's family. Members of Akia's family also addressed the media. Thank you to everyone for their thoughts and their prayers. Akia's aunt, Synovia Wilson, said, for keeping hope for our family that we would find her alive, even though the evidence says something different, that she's not. We just want to say thank you and just to please continue to keep us in your prayers. Akia's stepfather, Sean Wilkinson, took to the podium to thank the investigation agencies who worked on Akia's case. He also brought attention to an issue that is all too common. Domestic violence is real, and when it happens, we need to address it, said Wilkinson. The family remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice for Akia. Her case has profoundly impacted their lives and relationships, but they stand united, vowing to persist until the final judgment is rendered. Candace Lane Rogers, a 9-year-old girl attending Holmes Elementary School, lived with her mother in Spokane, Washington. On March 6, 1959, Candace was out selling mints for her Camp Fire Girl Scout troop in the neighborhood when she suddenly disappeared. Later that evening, after Candace failed to return home, her mother reported her missing. A massive search was launched with police officers, volunteers, and family members all scouring the neighborhood and surrounding areas in hopes of finding her. Helicopters were also called in to search from above, and sadly, during the search, one of the helicopters crashed, resulting in 3 casualties. 12 hours later, a police officer found 6 boxes of mints scattered near a bridge. However, there was no sign of Candace. Police would receive more than 750 tips in the following days, but none of them panned out. Her case was covered in the media, and her mother appealed to anyone who could help them provide any information into her disappearance, but to no avail. Then 16 days later, 2 hunters found Candace's shoes while hunting groundhogs in the remote woods. They notified police, and soon a search of the area found the body of Candace. She was found 12 miles away from her home. She had been buried under a pile of pine needles and brush. Her legs had been tied together at the ankles with parts of her own slip. An autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death with a piece of her own slip. Over the years, several people confessed to the murder of the child, but none of the confessions were credible. Alfred Graves and James Howard Barnett were considered suspects, but they committed suicide shortly after. The only prime suspect was Hubian Morse. Morse was a convicted serial killer and had murdered 2 Spokane women in a killing spree between 1959 and 1961. In 1955, he was charged for attempted molestation of 28-year-old girls while they were selling Girl Scout cookies in Fairfield, California. He was admitted to a Tascadero State Mental Hospital for therapy and released as cured in January of 1957. Morse submitting to killing 3 women but denied that he had anything to do with Candace's murder. In 2001, investigators were able to retrieve an unknown male's DNA from Candace's clothing. A DNA test ruled Morse out as a suspect. Police interviewed multiple suspects over the last 6 decades, but none were ever charged. In 2020, the investigators reached out to a Texas-based company, Orem Labs, who were able to build a DNA profile. The DNA profile was entered into genealogy databases, and investigators found 3 possible suspects. The suspects were all brothers but were already dead. Police learned that only one of the brothers, John Ray Hoff, had had children. The police then contacted Hoff's daughter, who agreed to provide a DNA sample. A DNA test revealed that it was 2,900,000 times more likely that Hoff's daughter was a genealogical match to the DNA sample found at the crime scene. Police then exhumed Hoff's body, and a DNA test subsequently identified John Ray Hoff as the killer. John Ray Hoff was 20 years old in 1959 and was never a suspect in Candace's murder. Hoff was a troubled teenager, and at the age of 16 he ran away from a state boys training camp near Olympia. Authorities captured Hoff and 3 other boys near Yakima. His troubles would continue even after he was married and had children. In 1970, Hoff committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. In an eerie coincidence, police learned that Candace and Hoff were both buried in the same cemetery. It was also discovered by investigators that Hoff's stepsister was Candace's big sister in her Girl Scout campfire group. Hoff's wife and daughter later took Hoff's body from the cemetery to give Candace's family some privacy. After 62 years, the case was finally solved, though it brought little peace to anyone involved. Moving on to the next case.